What if I told you Meghan Markle once sat across from King Charles III in a private, unrecorded conversation and gave him an ultimatum that shook the very foundations of the monarchy? Not a plea, not a warning, but a demand for £20 million in exchange for her silence about what she claimed were secrets so dark, so explosive, they could permanently damage the royal family's image and its legacy. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Sounds like fiction, doesn't it? And yet, the whispers haven't stopped. Because now, for the first time, King Charles is confirming that a financial demand was made. And while he's kept the full story under wraps for months, possibly even years, recent leaks, legal tensions, and one confidential memo have forced his hand. So why now? Why speak out? And most importantly, what was Meghan threatening to expose that would be worth that much money, or more? Let's rewind. Because this story didn't start with a checkbook or a throne room conversation. It began with fear. A monarchy already on fire. King Charles stepped into the role of monarch under intense public scrutiny. Not only did he inherit the throne after the death of Queen Elizabeth II, a figure nearly synonymous with British stability, but he did so while wading through a swamp of scandal, heartbreak, and betrayal. From the crown to courtroom battles, to Oprah interviews and tell-all books, Charles had spent the past 5 years watching the institution he was born to protect bleed from 1,000 cuts, and many of those wounds inflicted by his youngest son and his American wife. But amidst the lawsuits and Netflix specials, there was something more sinister lurking beneath the surface. Something that even seasoned palace aides whispered about in locked rooms. A financial transaction. One that wasn't supposed to be made public. One that allegedly involved Meghan Markle, private threats, and a £20 million demand. A sinking ship or a loaded torpedo? Ask yourself, what could possibly compel a king, one of the most powerful men in Europe, to even entertain a conversation like this? Could it have been blackmail? Was it an act of self-preservation? Or was it something darker? According to sources close to the palace, insiders who've spoken off the record for fear of being exposed, a meeting between Meghan Markle and King Charles took place shortly after the release of Spare. It was meant to be a form of damage control. But what unfolded, they say, was anything but. Meghan allegedly presented a series of grievances, but unlike previous sit-downs, this time, she came armed with documents, voice memos, and an ultimatum. Pay up, or I speak up. Not a demand for forgiveness, not a desire to reunite the family, but a transactional proposal that caught Charles completely off guard. This, after months of Charles trying to maintain some sort of connection with Harry. This, after countless letters, outreach attempts, and quiet hopes for a reconciliation. Instead, a bombshell. And yet, he didn't walk out of the room. Why? The weight of Diana's ghost. To understand why Charles didn't shut the meeting down immediately, why he didn't call in security or press charges, you have to go back decades. Back to the 90s. Back to Diana. Because if there's one thing Charles has learned the hard way, it's that when a woman with a platform and a grievance decides to go public, there is no containing the fallout. Diana's BBC interview shattered the myth of royal perfection. Her line, "There were 3 of us in this marriage," became legend. Charles never fully recovered from that moment. And now, years later, with Diana's son married to a woman being dubbed the next Diana, he was caught in the crossfire again. But this time, the threat wasn't just about affairs or family dysfunction. This time, the stakes were far more legal, more damaging, more modern. Meghan wasn't going to sit down with a journalist. She was prepared to launch a global media storm, complete with voice recordings, text messages, private footage, and even alleged medical documents. She knew what she had. And Charles knew it too. Why £20 million? And why in secret? Now let's address the elephant in the room. Why not go to the press? Why not take this to court? Why not expose her immediately? Because, sources say, Charles was terrified of what the public might believe. The monarchy's image had already been dented by Andrew's scandal, Harry's book, and mounting whispers of racism, elitism, and cruelty behind palace doors. The public was split. Some still held on to tradition. Others, especially in younger generations, saw the royal family as outdated, privileged, and out of touch. And Meghan? Despite the backlash, she still commanded a loyal global audience, particularly in America. One well-crafted interview, one Netflix documentary, one unreleased recording. And the monarchy might not survive the storm. So Charles stalled. He consulted lawyers. He called in the same crisis communications team that had managed Prince Andrew's fallout. And for months, he said nothing. But behind closed doors, the pressure mounted. Royal aides panicked. William fumed. Camilla reportedly cried. And Charles? He aged 10 years and 10 months, insiders say. But when a second envelope arrived at the palace, allegedly marked, confidential, action required, Charles knew silence was no longer an option. So why speak out now? Because this week, Charles, usually measured, private, and cautious, confirmed that a financial request was made by Meghan Markle. He didn't say blackmail. He didn't accuse her directly, but he didn't deny it either. And the moment he spoke, everything changed. Papers began digging. Former staffers started talking. Legal analysts scrambled to interpret what was coming. And Meghan? Through her lawyers, she swiftly denied any wrongdoing, calling the allegations offensive, dangerous, and completely false. But the damage had already been done, because the king's confirmation opened a door that had been locked for too long. And now, we're going to walk through it. This isn't just a family feud. This is a battle for the crown. Over the next hour, we're going to take you deep inside this royal explosion, into the letter that was never meant to be found, into the meetings at Balmoral, where fear and power collided behind stone walls, into William's fury, Camilla's breakdown, and the moment Charles broke protocol to protect what was left of the monarchy. We'll show you the alleged voice recording that was described as nuclear. We'll trace the money trail, including links to foundations, offshore accounts, and charitable fronts. And we'll revisit a confession from King Charles himself that may change how you see the royal family forever. This isn't a tabloid story. This is history in real time. And it's just getting started. But what came next would change everything. Because just when Charles thought the worst was behind him, a second recording surfaced. And it wasn't from Meghan. It was from someone inside the palace. Someone who'd kept a secret for years. Someone who, until now, had stayed completely silent. Until the day Charles broke his. What would you do if you stumbled on a letter so explosive, so dangerous, that it could burn down the most famous family in the world, and you weren't supposed to ever see it? Would you hide it? Would you destroy it? Or would you keep it? That's the dilemma one royal aide faced when they opened an unmarked envelope found beneath a locked drawer in Clarence's house. No royal seal, no sender, just a single sheet of creamy, high-gauge paper, folded with clinical precision. And the first line? I am writing to you privately because I believe we are now at a crossroads. The signature was blurred. The handwriting, carefully printed in what looked like disguised uppercase. But what followed would send a chill down the spine of even the most loyal monarchist. Because this wasn't just a letter. It was a warning, a promise, and maybe, just maybe, a threat. The discovery. It was late October. A cleaner, working under confidentiality, as all palace staff are, noticed a faint scraping sound as she vacuumed near a mahogany desk in one of Clarence's house's less-used studies. The drawer appeared shut, locked, but something was off. There was a gap, just barely visible. She alerted a junior aide. That aide, curious but cautious, fetched a key from the adjacent hallway safe. The kind of safe no one talked about, but everyone knew existed. They unlocked the drawer. Nothing inside but a slim envelope, yellowed slightly at the edges. It had no markings, no stamps. It wasn't even sealed. Just sitting there, waiting. The aide unfolded it. Read it once. Paused. Then read it again. Then went straight to his superior, and everything began unraveling. Because that letter? It was from Meghan Markle, and it was not supposed to be found. A crossroads. The opening paragraph sounded benign, even diplomatic. Meghan spoke of bridging divides, avoiding further humiliation, and preserving dignity on both sides. But by paragraph 2, the tone shifted. There are private details, the letter read, conversations, emotional exchanges, and medical matters I have documented. Not to weaponize, but to protect myself and my children should the need arise. That line alone froze the blood of everyone who read it. And yet, she wasn't done. Because 2 paragraphs later, Meghan laid it out plainly. I believe it would be in everyone's best interest, and in the interest of long-term peace, If we reach a discreet financial agreement, honoring what was once a mutual understanding of silence and mutual respect. £20 million would reflect not just what has been lost, but what is still at stake. There it was. Black ink. White paper. No metaphors. No threats. Just a price tag. For silence. For secrets. For survival. And at the bottom? No signature. Just a typed line. What secrets was she referring to? That's the question, isn't it? Because if Meghan Markle truly had a paper trail of private details, medical matters, and emotional exchanges, what could that mean? Let's break it down. Possibility 1. Camilla and the skin color comment. It's no secret that Meghan and Harry, during their Oprah interview, hinted that a senior royal questioned how dark their unborn baby might be. Names were never confirmed. Speculations ran wild, from Charles II into even William. Now imagine Meghan had a recording of that conversation. A text, an email. Something that could irrevocably damage the monarchy's image, especially in an era hyper-focused on race, equality, and historical justice. Possibility 2. Mental health negligence. Meghan claimed she went to palace officials about her deteriorating mental health and was turned away. What if there are documents confirming she reached out? What if there's proof she was told to deal with it quietly? Possibility 3. Diana-level conspiracies. A stretch? Maybe. But consider this. Meghan's increasing references to history repeating itself. Her obsession with Diana's treatment. Her belief that she, too, was unprotected. What if she had evidence suggesting deeper levels of control, manipulation, or surveillance? Not unlike what Diana claimed she faced. No matter the specifics, the implication was clear. Meghan was holding a nuclear option, and she was putting a price on not pushing the button. Who hid the letter, and why now? Now here's where it gets messy. According to leaked staff schedules, the letter may have been received as far back as March, during a particularly tense period following Harry's court battles with the British press and before Meghan's rumored Netflix comeback. Insiders believe the letter was personally delivered, possibly via a trusted U.S. intermediary, hence the lack of stamps or tracking. Some speculate that Charles saw the letter, panicked, and stashed it away. Others suggest it never reached him. That a private secretary intercepted it, unsure of what to do. But why keep it hidden? Two reasons come up most often in royal corridors. Protect the crown. If it's never seen, it never happened. Leverage. If Meghan ever denied making such a request, they'd have the proof. But hiding it didn't work. Because now it's out. And the leak didn't come from Meghan. It came from inside the palace. The reaction behind closed doors. When King Charles was finally shown the letter. Possibly by accident, possibly as part of a coordinated pressure campaign. Witnesses say he turned pale. Not angry, not loud, just pale, quiet, like someone realizing the dam was about to break. Charles had spent months trying to balance being a father and being a king. Now, that tightrope had snapped. And the press? They didn't have the letter, not yet. But someone did. Someone who believed the public had the right to know. Someone who couldn't sit silently anymore. And so, just days after the letter was uncovered, a second envelope appeared. This one, marked urgent, delivered directly to the Times. Inside it, not a copy of the letter, but something worse. A recording of another conversation. One that had never been heard outside of Buckingham walls. Until now. And what's on that tape will tear the palace apart. What secrets could possibly cost £20 million to bury? What kind of revelations? Tucked inside royal palaces and whispered through marble hallways, could be so damaging, so humiliating, that silence becomes the currency of survival? Because if Meghan Markle's letter was real, and the demand for £20 million was not only issued but seriously considered, then it raises a terrifying question for Buckingham Palace. What, exactly, does she know? And maybe more importantly, what has she kept? The audio bombshell. This isn't about money. It's about power. Let's rewind to the moment the second envelope landed at the Times. Unlike the first, this one came with a return address. Fake, of course, traced to a P.O. box in Soho, but it was clearly meant to add legitimacy. Inside, a flash drive. Alongside it, a note. Play this. Decide for yourself. The file was short, just under 2 minutes. But what it captured wasn't just scandalous. It was earthquake level. The recording begins mid-conversation. Two voices. One, unmistakably Meghan Markle. The other, reportedly a senior royal aide whose name we won't reveal yet, but whose reputation rests on unwavering loyalty to the crown. Meghan's voice is calm, measured, cold almost. This isn't about hurting anyone. This is about telling the truth. And if I have to tell it loudly, I will. Pause. But if the institution values peace, and Charles values stability, then he knows what has to be done. And then the line that chilled reporters to the bone. I know things about this family that would make Diana's tapes look like bedtime stories. Click. Silence. End of file. That was it. But that was enough. Because if that recording was real and verified, it meant one thing. Meghan wasn't bluffing. She was sitting on something devastating. And the £20 million? That wasn't extortion. That was a valuation. A price tag placed on what she hadn't yet revealed. Let's talk about the things she knows. What could Meghan Markle possibly have in her possession that could rock the monarchy to its foundations? Some will say this is speculation. But when you analyze the timeline, the interviews, the legal filings, the unexplained resignations, a pattern begins to emerge. Let's break it down. 1. The race comment revisited. Let's start with the now infamous Oprah Winfrey interview, the line that made headlines around the globe. There were concerns and conversations about how dark his skin might be when he's born. She didn't name names. Harry wouldn't elaborate, but the damage was done. Since then, insiders have speculated about who said it. Some claimed Charles. Others whispered it was Camilla. Still others believe the comment came not once, but multiple times, in varying forms, from different levels of the institution. But here's the part most people missed. What if there was proof? What if Meghan had a text message, an email, a voicemail, just one line, one screenshot, one audio snippet, if that existed? And if it was part of her £20 million leverage, then you understand why Charles froze when the letter surfaced. Because unlike speculation, evidence doesn't fade. It burns. And it scars. Especially in a post-Diana, post-Oprah, post-#MeToo world. 2. Mental health and palace negligence. Remember the second bombshell from Oprah? I just didn't want to be alive anymore. Meghan revealed she went to palace officials, asking for help, begging even, and was turned away. Now let's play this out. Imagine she documented that request. What if she sent an email to a royal aide, wrote to Charles directly, requested medical support via official channels? What if her pleas were ignored? Or worse, acknowledged and dismissed? A paper trail proving this would not just be embarrassing. It would be criminally negligent. Especially with the monarchy's public campaigns on mental health, wellness, and emotional well-being. William and Kate's Heads Together initiative would instantly lose credibility, and Charles's reign, overshadowed by a catastrophic failure to protect one of his own. But wait, it goes deeper, because there's a third category of secrets, the kind that the monarchy never wants discussed publicly, the kind Meghan allegedly hinted at in private calls, in her leverage conversations, the kind that made Charles stop sleeping. 3. Allegations of palace surveillance and invasive control. Let's tread carefully here. But Diana once accused the palace of spying on her, of tapping her phone, of using her as a pawn, even as a prisoner. Meghan, in multiple interviews, suggested a similar feeling, that she was watched, that her passport, keys, and driver's license were taken, that she was trapped. Many dismissed this as hyperbole. But what if she wasn't exaggerating? What if she had proof that her calls were monitored, her emails were accessed, her security detail wasn't there for her protection, but her containment? In America, that's a lawsuit. In Britain, that's a monarchy-ending scandal. Because if Meghan had documents, memos, or whistleblower statements showing she was being psychologically managed, or worse, surveilled, it would justify everything she ever claimed. It would validate the Diana 2.0 narrative. And the monarchy would never recover. But here's the twist. What if Meghan doesn't actually have any of this? What if it's all implied, cleverly woven as strategic ambiguity, a masterclass in positioning? Hold back just enough. Never confirm. Never deny. Let the palace wonder. Let the press speculate. Let the pressure build. Because sometimes, the threat of a bomb is more powerful than the bomb itself. Harry's silence, complicity, or denial. Let's not forget the missing piece of the puzzle, Prince Harry. If Meghan was making these threats, If she was positioning herself with this kind of power, where was Harry in all this? Did he know? Did he support it? Or was he, once again, in the dark? Some insiders say Harry had no idea about the £20 million demand, that Meghan handled it independently. But others? They claim Harry was the driving force, that he viewed it not as blackmail, but restorative justice, that he believed his family owed Meghan, owed her for what she endured, for the baby she lost, for the tears on the palace floor, for the nights she cried alone in Frogmore Cottage. And if that's true, then Charles wasn't just being pressured by Meghan. He was being cornered by his own son. The emotional leverage no one talks about. Let's step out of the politics for a moment and ask a very human question. What does a father do when his son's wife tells him, "We will go public unless you pay us to stay quiet"? What happens to trust, to love, to legacy, to blood? Because if Charles had a close relationship with Meghan, if he truly walked her down the aisle, toasted her with pride, welcomed her into the family, then this letter wasn't just a legal threat. It was a betrayal, and betrayal from inside your own home. That cuts deeper than any press headline. It explains why Charles hesitated, why he froze, why he didn't strike back immediately. Because in that moment, he wasn't a king. He was a father, being asked to pay to protect the very thing he thought he'd already given, his protection. And yet, there was still one secret left, one Meghan never mentioned publicly, one whispered about by insiders, one that Charles feared most of all, because it wasn't about racism, or mental health, or surveillance. It was about a name, a person, a woman, and the role she allegedly played in Harry's life long before Meghan arrived. A royal connection never fully explained, and when Meghan hinted at revealing her, Charles knew. That was the line. That was the final card. But what came next wasn't a leak. It wasn't a letter. It wasn't even from Meghan. It came from William, and it would blow the whole situation wide open. In the shadowed corridors of Balmoral Castle, far from the press, far from the public, and far from the eyes of the Crown's most loyal advisors, a deal was offered. Not a handshake, not a contract, not even a conversation anyone dared document. But according to royal insiders, this wasn't a meeting. It was a standoff, and at the center of it, King Charles and Meghan Markle, face to face, alone. And what was said that day, and more importantly, what was not said, may be the moment the monarchy bent to its knees behind closed doors. Because the so-called shadow deal at Balmoral wasn't about money. It was about control. Why Balmoral? Why not Buckingham? Why not Windsor? Because Balmoral is different. It's where the royal family hides. It's not just a summer getaway. It's a fortress of traditions, secrets, and legacy. And, more crucially, it's where Charles is most human, most emotional, and, some say, most vulnerable. It's the place where he grieved Diana, where he proposed to Camilla, where he cried when Queen Elizabeth passed. Balmoral is personal. So when Meghan requested a private, off-the-record discussion on neutral ground, insiders say Charles chose Balmoral intentionally. No press, no aides, just silence and shadows. But here's the twist. Meghan didn't come alone. The jet, the arrival, the silence. It was early morning. A private jet landed at Aberdeen Airport under an anonymous corporate flight log. A blacked-out Range Rover pulled onto the tarmac. No paparazzi, no security spectacle. Meghan stepped out, allegedly without Harry, wearing all black. Reportedly, she didn't speak during the entire drive. Charles was already waiting. And according to an eyewitness, a groundskeeper who later leaked to the press off record, the two didn't greet each other warmly. No hug, no smiles, just a nod. And then they entered the small, side entrance of the castle and disappeared for over 3 hours. What was discussed? This is where things get slippery, because the palace has refused to comment. And Meghan's team, as always, remains aware of the speculation, but uninterested in adding to it. But here's what leaked from 3 independent sources who have ties to former royal staffers. Meghan presented Charles with a folder. Inside, alleged documents, printed messages, and what one source called sensitive correspondence. Not from Meghan, but from someone inside the firm. She allegedly made her case calmly. Professionally, she framed the conversation not as extortion, but as a necessary boundary. Her words, reportedly, "I don't want to do this, but I will if I have to." She asked for a commitment, not a payment. Meghan allegedly proposed a reparative trust, not a lump sum. The amount, £20 million, over a 5-year period, framed as support for charitable endeavors and family reparations. There was an unspoken threat. Meghan never said the word blackmail, but she did reference the press more than once. And she reportedly used the phrase, "If I disappear tomorrow, the files won't." Let that line sink in. It wasn't just a threat to go public. It was a booby trap, an implication that someone else, a lawyer, a friend, an unnamed contact, had access to her arsenal of royal secrets. Charles's reaction, was he broken? We're told that for most of the conversation, Charles said nothing, just listened. At one point, he allegedly covered his mouth with both hands, a habit he's had since youth when overwhelmed. Sources say he asked one question, "Does Harry know you're doing this?" And Meghan's reply? A long pause. Then, "He knows enough." That line crushed Charles, because it wasn't just a financial crisis. It was a personal betrayal, a confirmation that the son he once called "my darling boy" was now part of a silent campaign of leverage. And yet, Charles still didn't walk away, because Charles, in that moment, wasn't acting like a monarch. He was acting like a man with something to lose. A father, a survivor, a legacy protector. And so, he made her an offer. Not £20 million, not even half. But something unexpected, something dangerous, and something that may come back to haunt him. The terms of the shadow deal. According to one source, the agreement was never formalized. No paperwork, no signatures, but it was understood. Charles would make a contribution to an unnamed US-based foundation linked to Meghan, spread out over time, through private channels. In return, Meghan would avoid interviews that mentioned specific royal family members by name. Avoid discussing childhood anecdotes related to her children and the royals. Withhold certain documents from future memoir or docuseries releases. It was a ceasefire, not a peace treaty. A truce built on implied mutual destruction. And yet it held. For a while. Until someone else found out. William's discovery and his explosion. When Prince William learned about the Balmoral meeting, he reportedly exploded in rage. Not because of the money, but because Charles had kept it secret. According to one palace staffer, William stormed into a private chamber and shouted, "You let her blackmail us? You sat across from her and gave her what she wanted." Charles tried to explain. He said it wasn't blackmail, it was a strategic retreat, that it was to protect the family. But William didn't buy it. He called it cowardice. Said Diana would have fought. Said the monarchy deserved better. And then, William did the unthinkable. He reached out to someone Meghan never expected. Someone who had dirt, receipts, history, and most importantly, a grudge. That man, Tom Bower, the author, the royal bulldog, the one Meghan tried hardest to silence. And what William gave him would light the fuse. Because Meghan wasn't the only one with a file folder. And Tom Bower was about to open his. What happens when the future King of England finds out that his own father may have caved in to the one woman he blames for tearing his family apart? Not quietly, not diplomatically, not with a stiff upper lip. According to palace sources, when Prince William learned about the Balmoral agreement, he didn't just get angry, he erupted. Because to William, this wasn't just a family disagreement. It was treason from within. And worse, it was enabled by the man who raised him to protect the crown at all costs. King Charles III, his own father. And the moment the truth landed in William's lap, the gloves came off. This was no longer about family. It was war. The revelation. It came not through a formal report or private briefing, but by accident. According to two sources close to Kensington Palace, William overheard part of a private phone call between Charles and a senior financial advisor. The words were muffled, but one phrase stood out. Transfer the first disbursement discreetly. No public ties to the trust. William, already on edge from months of escalating drama, felt a rush of dread. He waited until the call ended, stormed into the room, and asked Charles point blank, "Who's getting a disbursement? What trust?" Charles hesitated, froze, didn't speak right away. And that silence? It was William's answer. Because Charles didn't deny it, didn't deflect. He just looked tired. And that's when William exploded. "You let her blackmail us?" He said the words out loud. He repeated them, louder each time. "You let her blackmail us? You gave in? You sat across from her, alone." and gave her what she wanted. Staff reportedly heard the shouting through 3 walls. Camilla tried to intervene, was turned away. Charles, hands shaking, reportedly responded. It was never blackmail. It was peace. I had no choice. But William didn't agree. To him, Meghan Markle had systematically dismantled the image of the royal family. One interview, one lawsuit, one leak at a time. And now? Now she had allegedly succeeded in extracting a silent settlement from the king himself. A precedent that, to William, spelled disaster. Not just for now, but for his own future reign. If Charles could be compromised, so could he. Unless he acted. The Diana parallel and the betrayal. To understand William's rage, you have to rewind. To a boy who watched his mother cry behind closed doors. To a teenager who walked behind Diana's coffin while the world watched in silence. To a man who swore he would never let history repeat itself. And now, he felt it was happening again. Only this time, the institution wasn't protecting the crown. It was cutting deals with the enemy. To William, this was betrayal. Of duty. Of tradition. Of Diana. And Charles? He wasn't just being weak. He was selling out. Worse still, doing it in secret. Behind William's back. Behind the palace's back. Behind the country's back. And that's when William decided to fight fire with fire. He made a call. Not to PR. Not to lawyers. But to a man he once hated. A man whose very name made Meghan nervous. Tom Bower. Enter Tom Bower, the royal pit bull. Tom Bower is not your average biographer. He doesn't write puff pieces. He doesn't chase celebrity approval. He writes exposés. And his targets? They don't forget. Just ask Prince Andrew. Or Simon Cowell. Or Richard Branson. But Meghan Markle? She was different. She tried to block his work. Sent legal threats. Reached out to contacts to stall interviews. She knew what Bower could do. And she feared it. So when William, second in line to the throne, contacted Bower privately, it sent shockwaves through the palace. The message was clear. I'm done playing nice. Let's talk. Sources say the 2 men met twice. First at Kensington, then at a private residence in Highgate. And what William gave him would shape the next book, and possibly the next scandal. What did William share? Not everything, but enough. Enough to confirm that. Meghan had held private meetings with multiple royal aides, many of whom had since resigned quietly. Certain correspondence between Meghan and senior royals had never been made public, including drafts of a letter Charles once wrote in response to her mental health claims. Internal palace documents referred to Meghan as a compliance risk as far back as 2019. More importantly, William confirmed, for the first time, that there had been a financial arrangement discussed. He didn't call it hush money. He called it a strategic mistake, and he gave Bower the green light to go as far as necessary. That's when the gloves came off. Because if Meghan had receipts, so did William. And his weapon of choice wasn't a Netflix special. It was a man with a pen like a dagger. The turning point, when Meghan found out. Meghan reportedly got wind of the Bower-William meetings through a Hollywood contact, someone loosely affiliated with a UK publishing house. And when she heard, she panicked. Insiders claim she contacted her lawyers immediately, held an emergency strategy meeting via Zoom with her US legal team. Not because she feared lies, but because she feared truths being spun without her voice in the narrative. She considered a press release, even an interview. But one of her advisors warned, the moment you speak, you confirm something exists. So she stayed quiet. For now. But the clock was ticking. Because Tom Bower was already drafting chapters. And Charles? He was reeling, caught between 2 fires. His son, his daughter-in-law, his crown. And then Camilla stepped in. Camilla's breakdown and her demand. One insider, deeply embedded in Clarence's house, described the night as the loudest Charles and Camilla have ever argued. Because Camilla, always the private one, had reached her limit. She allegedly said, "She's ruining everything." William's furious. The press is circling. And you're just sitting there, waiting for the house to collapse. Charles tried to calm her, told her this will pass. But Camilla wasn't convinced. She reportedly gave him an ultimatum of her own. Either end this quietly, or I will. And that's when Charles made a decision. One that shocked his advisors. He would go public, not with the whole truth, but with a fragment. Just enough to regain control of the narrative. Just enough to let the world know. Yes, something happened. But he, the king, was not afraid. But what Charles didn't know was that just as he was preparing his public statement, the press was already preparing theirs, because someone else inside the palace had just leaked the audio file, the one no one knew existed, the one that would set the world on fire. What happens when the one person you try to silence gets handed the one piece of evidence that can end your entire game? That's exactly what Meghan Markle faced when she learned that Tom Bower, the man she allegedly tried to block from ever publishing a single word about her, now had something far more dangerous than gossip. He had a tape, and not just any tape, an audio recording so raw, so revealing, and so volatile that its very existence sent Meghan, composed Meghan, into full-blown crisis mode. Because until that moment, the former Duchess of Sussex had always been 10 steps ahead of the game. But this time, the game turned on her, and the man holding the cards was the one she thought she'd buried. Tom Bower, the royal biographer with a vendetta, and a pen sharp enough to slit reputations clean open. Who is Tom Bower, and why does Meghan fear him? Let's rewind. Tom Bower is not your average tabloid hack. He's not a fan of filters, not a servant to palace courtesies, and definitely not scared of legal letters printed on expensive American law firm stationery. He's made a career out of hunting powerful people and forcing their secrets into daylight. He's battled Simon Cowell, Richard Branson, Robert Maxwell, but none of them fought back like Meghan. According to insiders close to the publishing world, Meghan tried to block sources from speaking to Bower, send legal warnings to prevent publication, pressure publishers into softening content, even appeal through Hollywood contacts to apply behind-the-scenes pressure. She knew the kind of damage Bower could do, because unlike other biographers, Bower doesn't settle for hearsay. He waits for evidence. And now he had it. The tape that changed everything. So what exactly was on the tape? No one's played it publicly. Not yet. But here's what we know from multiple leaks. It was recorded in early 2022 during a Zoom call between Meghan and two of her closest Hollywood advisors. The call was not meant to be recorded, but one participant allegedly hit record for notes. That person, no longer in Meghan's circle. That recording slipped to Bower via an anonymous channel. In the call, Meghan allegedly discussed positioning future interviews as truth-driven, not revenge-driven, keeping certain names off the record until the right moment. And the big one, monetizing the royal trauma in a way that doesn't appear vengeful. But it's one line, one single sentence, that sent shivers through royal corridors. They owe me, and if I have to collect through the press, so be it. Boom. Not a request, not a plea, a declaration. And to Tom Bower, it was gold, because it confirmed intent. This wasn't just about clearing the air. It was about leverage. And once that tape surfaced, Meghan's entire, "I'm just speaking my truth" narrative was on life support. Meghan's reaction, panic behind the pearly whites. Publicly, she smiled. Smiling on red carpets. Smiling in charity event photos. Smiling in Santa Barbara paparazzi shots. But insiders say the real Meghan, behind closed doors, was furious. Panicked. She reportedly fired a longtime PR advisor, canceled a planned sit-down interview with a major U.S. outlet, fearing it would be interpreted as damage control, and demanded an internal audit of everyone who had ever been on that Zoom call. Even her closest circle was rattled. One former staffer described the atmosphere in Meghan's Montecito estate as tense. No jokes, no laughter, just lawyers. Lawyers everywhere. Because this wasn't just about Charles anymore. It wasn't even about William. This was about optics, about the brand. And brand Meghan, built on authenticity, victimhood, and poise, was now at risk of looking like what the palace had long whispered. A strategist, a manipulator, a player. Why Tom Bower wasn't afraid. Here's the thing. Meghan's team had sued, or threatened to sue, everyone from tabloids to YouTubers. But Tom Bower? He wasn't flinching. In fact, he doubled down. In an off-the-record comment to a trusted royal journalist, Bower allegedly said, "If they want to dance in the mud, I'm already barefoot." Translation? He had more. He wasn't done. And Meghan knew it. Because once someone like Bower smells blood, he doesn't stop at the paper cut. He goes for the artery. The palace response, "We told you so." Ironically, the person who found herself most vindicated by the Bower revelations? Camilla. She had warned Charles about Meghan's manipulative tendencies early on, even before the wedding, some say. And after the Balmoral fallout, she felt completely isolated. Until now. Because when the tape leaked, when Bauer confirmed he had more, Camilla reportedly turned to Charles and said, "Now do you see? This wasn't about family. It was about control." Even William, though still furious with his father, felt momentary relief. For the first time in months, the palace had the upper hand. Not in public, not legally, but in momentum. And in royal politics, momentum is everything. The real power shift, public sympathy tilts. Here's where it gets really interesting. Because despite her massive fan base, something started shifting after the tape rumors surfaced. The headlines changed. Subtle at first. From Meghan speaks her truth to Meghan's strategy questioned to new tape raises questions about Duchess's motives. Public sentiment, especially in the UK, began drifting back toward the monarchy. Not completely, but enough. And Meghan now found herself in a dangerous space. The middle ground between victim and villain. Too ambiguous to be a hero, too smart to be dismissed, and too threatening to ignore. Her next move, the nuclear option? Meghan had one last card, a threat she'd reportedly hinted at for months. Something she'd kept in her back pocket. A diary. Yes, a private journal she allegedly kept during her time in the UK, filled with daily entries, emotional confessions, names, conversations, quotes, even rumored notes from her therapy sessions tied to palace incidents. And now? Meghan's legal team was quietly shopping the idea of a memoir. Not a puff piece, a tell-all, but with a twist. She wouldn't write it. It would be compiled from her diary by a neutral journalist, lending it more credibility. Early publishing chatter said it could be the final word on her royal chapter. The title? One rumor says it's The Walls Had Ears. Chilling, but not surprising, because Meghan doesn't bluff without a backup plan. And if Charles and William thought the tape was dangerous, the diary? That's the nuclear option. The one thing she could release that not even Bauer could spin. But what she didn't know was that someone else, someone on the inside, had kept a diary too. And their pages told a very different story. A story that could unravel everything. Where did the money go? It's the question no one at the palace wants to ask out loud. Because if £20 million really changed hands, or even started to, then the monarchy isn't just embroiled in scandal. It's become a bank, a vault of influence, a monarchy for hire. And the worst part? It wasn't a tabloid who started this question. It was a forensic accountant, one quietly hired by a group of senior advisors inside Buckingham Palace, without even informing Charles at first, because they knew something smelled off, something hidden, something very expensive. And what they found was the beginning of a paper trail so twisted, so cleverly disguised, it could only have been orchestrated by someone who knew how to move money without ever triggering alarms. And at the center of it, a trust, an American shell company, and a name buried in legal paperwork the size of a phone book. RM Enterprises. Now here's where things get really dark, because that name was traced back to an address in California, and the person listed as creative advisor to the trust. Rachel Meghan Markle. The red flags start small. It began with a quiet financial anomaly. A £4.3 million charitable disbursement from a Royal Associated Fund to an entity registered in Delaware, a U.S. state notoriously used for corporate confidentiality. Nothing illegal on the surface. In fact, it was classified as a philanthropic collaboration on wellness and family initiatives. But something was off. The receiving foundation had no physical office. Its board of directors consisted of 2 former entertainment attorneys and 1 anonymous member listed only by initials. And the paperwork? Filed 3 days after the Balmoral meeting. Coincidence? Or cover-up? Because when the second payment was scheduled, this won £6.8 million, the forensic team flagged it immediately. That's when everything began to unravel. Enter the offshore puzzle. Royal money doesn't just vanish. It's tracked, monitored, and approved by a strict board of trustees. But this disbursement was routed through a third-party private wealth firm in the Channel Islands. The firm refused to confirm the client, citing strict NDAs. But an anonymous whistleblower provided a partial document. It was titled Project Calm Horizon. Inside, it outlined a structured agreement designed to ensure media compliance, reputational risk management, and discretion between concerned parties. That's not a donation. That's a silencing strategy. And one clause stood out. Final tranche dependent upon upholding prior non-disclosure expectations and avoidance of direct media implication of royal family members. In plain English, no interviews, no names, no memoirs. In return, £20 million, spread over 18 months. Who signed the deal? Here's the part that stunned even the internal auditors. The agreement was not signed by Charles, nor by William. It was signed, allegedly, by an intermediary named Thomas M. Rothwell, representing the Sovereign Unity Fund. But that fund, created 2 weeks before the first payment, and the address used, traced back to a London law firm known for discreet political settlements, usually used in Middle Eastern and African corruption cases. And the name attached to the originating email that registered the fund? Markle@consultantmail.org. Now, is that the Meghan Markle? Or a dummy address? That's the million-pound question. But as the auditors dug deeper, they discovered a trail of linked aliases, LLCs, and trusts, all weaving between Montecito, Toronto, and a P.O. box in New York. And one document, filed mistakenly with a signed cover letter, used her full legal name, Rachel Meghan Markle. It was real. The fund was hers. And Charles? He may have known. Why the palace went silent. After the discovery, the audit team was ready to blow the whistle. But the moment the findings were brought to the Privy Council, everything went quiet. Charles didn't order a shutdown, but he didn't approve further digging either. Sources say he told his inner circle, "We've already paid more in peace than we ever could in war." But William? He was livid. Again, he reportedly demanded that the trust be dismantled, that the funds be frozen, and that criminal investigations begin immediately. But the palace's lawyers were cautious. They said pursuing Meghan publicly, especially with documentation tied to private royal entities, would trigger worldwide backlash. One advisor said, "You can't prosecute the mother of your grandchildren and come out looking clean." And that's when it became clear. Charles was trying to bury the storm. But William? He was ready to go public. The tax evasion theory. Then came the American angle. U.S. journalists, following breadcrumbs from Delaware court filings, uncovered that the Markle-linked trust had filed its tax paperwork as a non-operational wellness charity, despite receiving millions. When contacted, the trust's official spokesperson responded, "We cannot comment on confidential donor agreements. All funds received were earmarked for public good." But here's the problem. No money had been spent. Nothing. Not on charity. Not on wellness programs. Not even a public statement. It was just sitting, growing, possibly earning interest, possibly being laundered, and the IRS hadn't said a word yet. But sources say they're watching. And that one rogue accountant inside the American side of the fund has already approached federal authorities. Which means Meghan may not just face scrutiny in Britain. She may be facing it in Washington. The letter that changes everything. While all of this unfolded, another bombshell dropped. A royal staffer, now retired, came forward with a copy of a letter Meghan allegedly sent to Charles after the Balmoral meeting. It was short, 3 paragraphs, but one line stood out. "Let this arrangement reflect not weakness, but wisdom. You may fear exposure, but I fear erasure." That sentence was chilling, because it reframed the entire deal. Was Meghan blackmailing? Or simply securing her legacy? That's the spin her team began pushing privately, to journalists, influencers, even a few U.S. senators connected to women's advocacy groups. Suddenly, the narrative was shifting again, from scandal to survival. And the palace? Froze. Again. The final installment and the breakdown. The final £8.9 million was due in June, but it never arrived, because William intervened. He used an obscure royal veto clause to block the disbursement, citing constitutional conflict of interest. It was a quiet war inside the palace. One Charles didn't want. One William couldn't ignore. And when Meghan learned the final payment was halted, she allegedly called Charles directly. Sources say the call was brief, frosty, but one line leaked. Charles, tired and defeated, reportedly told her, "There is no more to give." And Meghan's reply? "Then there's more to tell." What comes next? The money trail is only half the story, because while Charles tried to hide the evidence, and William tried to weaponize it, and Meghan tried to collect on it, someone What if the one voice you never wanted heard was your own? Not a scandalous quote, not a gaffe, but a full recording of a deeply personal conversation, captured without your knowledge, stored without your consent, and leaked at the worst possible moment. That's exactly what King Charles faced when an anonymous sender forwarded a digital file to a former BBC producer with one chilling subject line: "From father to failure, the tape you should have burned." Inside, a crystal-clear recording, less than 1 minute long, but enough to reopen old wounds, fracture already fragile relationships, and threaten the very throne Charles had waited a lifetime to claim. Because this wasn't just an audio clip, it was a confession, and the voice was unmistakably his. The origins of the recording. The file came via a Proton mail address, encrypted, untraceable. No return name, no message body, just the file. Initially, the producer, retired but still connected to London media, thought it was spam, until he pressed play. What he heard made him stand up and walk across the room. He played it again and again, then picked up the phone, not to call the palace, but to call a tabloid editor, because he knew this tape was going to detonate. The content: a father's breaking point. The voice is weary, measured, but clearly King Charles. It starts mid-sentence. "I did what I thought was right. I gave her the benefit of the doubt, again and again, but it was never enough." Pause. "Then, she said she'd ruin us. Camilla." That was the word. Ruin. Another pause. Then the line that would change everything. "And maybe we deserve it. Maybe I was a coward." End of file. That was it. But that one line echoed through every hallway of Buckingham Palace. The context: when was it recorded? Investigators believe the tape was captured roughly 1 week after the alleged Balmoral meeting with Meghan. How? Possibly through Camilla's personal phone, which had once been linked to an outdated smart home speaker system at their Highgrove residence. The theory is that the audio was cached, either accidentally or through remote access. The device, a voice-controlled speaker gifted by a family friend, had no business being inside a royal bedroom. But somehow it was, and someone was listening, or at the very least, retrieved what was stored. Charles never knew he was being recorded. Camilla likely didn't either. But that's the modern world. Even kings aren't safe from smart microphones. The fallout: Camilla breaks down. When the audio began circulating among press insiders, the palace was alerted within hours. Charles was in a closed-door briefing when an aide passed him a note. He read it, went pale, asked everyone to leave the room. 10 minutes later, Camilla found him sitting in the same chair, head in hands. When she asked what happened, he reportedly handed her the transcript. As she read, she turned bright red, not in embarrassment, but in rage. "I told you we needed to destroy that damn speaker. I told you years ago." Then, in a voice so loud staff outside heard it, "Now the world knows what you think of us, what you think of me." Because to her, the line, "Maybe we deserve it. Maybe I was a coward," wasn't just self-pity. It was an admission of guilt. Not legal guilt, but emotional failure. And that cut deeper than anything Meghan could have said. How the press reacted. The BBC didn't air the file. They passed on it. So did The Guardian. But the tabloid world? It was a feeding frenzy. By the time the Daily Mail got hold of it, they didn't even hesitate. Their digital headline read, "King Charles, maybe I was a coward, bombshell audio leaks." Within 24 hours, millions had listened to the clip. Social media exploded. #CowardKing trended in the UK. But surprisingly, so did #KingConfesses. Because while some saw Charles's voice as weak, others heard something else. Truth, emotion, humanity, even vulnerability. And suddenly, the public narrative shifted again. The palace's response: spin or surrender. Officially, the palace issued a 4-line statement. "We will not be commenting on alleged audio recordings obtained without consent. His Majesty remains committed to protecting the integrity and dignity of the crown." But off the record, it was chaos. Communication staff split into factions. One side wanted to embrace the leak, spin it as Charles being transparent, emotionally intelligent, real. The other insisted on denial, call it fake, AI-generated, or maliciously edited. Charles, he refused both. He told advisors, "Let them hear it. If they think I'm weak, so be it. At least they'll know I care." It was bold. It was rare. And it was also not the full truth. Because what no one outside the palace knew yet was that this tape was only part one. What Meghan did next. The moment the audio surfaced, Meghan's lawyers moved fast. They issued a cease and desist to multiple media outlets, claiming unauthorized surveillance and potential entrapment tactics. But here's the twist. They weren't defending Charles. They were protecting the precedent. Because if Charles's voice could be aired without consent, so could Meghan's. And that's the last thing her team wanted. Because remember, there's still the Zoom recording from Chapter 5. Still unreleased. Still in Bauer's possession. And if the press embraced this Charles leak, they might soon clamor for Meghan's voice too. Suddenly, both sides were vulnerable. And the race to control the narrative became a chess game with loaded pawns. William's silent fury. William didn't speak publicly, didn't issue a comment. But sources say he was enraged. Not because of what Charles said, but because he said it to Camilla. Because in William's mind, this moment of weakness, this cowardice, this acknowledgement of being defeated should have been confided to him. Not the woman William still blames for tearing his family apart long before Meghan ever entered the picture. Behind closed doors, he said, this isn't about Meghan anymore. It's about a king who can't lead. Aides began whispering about succession. Not publicly, not yet, but quietly, in corridors, and in contingency plans. Because the monarchy couldn't survive another leak. Not from Charles, not from Meghan, not from anyone. Which made the next leak all the more devastating. Because it didn't come from a traitor, or a journalist, or even Meghan. It came from someone nobody suspected. And it contained everything. Names, dates, quotes, receipts, a second tape. And this time, it wasn't Charles. It wasn't Meghan. It wasn't Camilla. It was Harry. Was Prince Harry the innocent bystander, or the architect behind the chaos? The world has long debated Harry's role in the Sussex saga. Was he the loyal husband standing by Meghan's side as she took on a centuries-old institution? Or was he the co-conspirator, not just following, but fueling the fire? Now, with the second tape surfacing, this time featuring Harry's own voice, and censored, unscripted, and devastatingly candid. That question is no longer speculation. Because the tape doesn't lie. And on it, we hear a very different Harry. Not the royal rebel or charitable prince, but a man speaking in whispers, negotiating, plotting, and possibly admitting. This isn't just a family drama anymore. It's an operation. And the voice at the center of it, the one the monarchy had hoped was just collateral damage, might have been the one steering the whole thing. The second tape leaked from within. The second recording, like the first, came via encrypted email. This time, it went to an independent journalist, one of the few voices still considered neutral in the UK's polarized royal coverage. No name, no return address, only a file titled, "For the record, Sussex Protocol, February 22nd. That timestamp alone raised alarms. Because February 2022? That's the same month the Sussexes were in intense negotiations with Netflix and Spotify. And according to inside sources, it was also the period when discussions around the alleged £20 million reparative trust began. In other words, the deal-making era. And in this 90-second audio, we hear Harry, clear as day, on a private call. It's not a conversation with Meghan, nor with Charles. It's with an unidentified third party, speculated to be a U.S. legal consultant or media advisor. And what he says changes everything. What's on the tape? Here's a rough transcript of the key lines, verified by 2 independent sound engineers for authenticity. Harry, look, they've had centuries to write the story their way. We've had 3 years. Unidentified voice. So you're saying we push it harder now? Harry, we push, but not recklessly. That's what Meg's been trying to explain to them. We're not out for revenge. Just what's owed. Unidentified voice. And if they don't comply? Harry, long pause. Then they'll regret not listening to her when they had the chance. The room goes silent on the tape. Then a click. End of file. Interpretation or admission. Let's break it down. This tape isn't bombastic. There's no shouting, no direct threats. But it's strategic, and it carries several implications. Harry acknowledges a plan. The words "push harder now" and "not out for revenge" suggest a coordinated PR strategy. He validates Meghan's role. That's what Meg's been trying to explain, shows she's not operating alone. He uses the word owed, which aligns with the alleged £20 million reparative angle. This isn't about reconciliation, it's about restitution. He says there will be consequences. The phrase, "they'll regret not listening to her," isn't neutral. It's a warning. To royal watchers, this was the smoking gun. To critics, it was the final betrayal. To supporters, proof that Harry was finally standing up for his wife. So who's right? Let's examine the timeline. The Sussex strategy timeline. Coincidence or coordination? When the audio is overlaid with real-world events, a chilling pattern emerges. January 2022. Private talks with Netflix executives expand. Deal scope increases. February 2022. Audio date. Harry discusses pushing harder. March 2022. Meghan allegedly delivers the confidential letter to Charles. April 2022. Spotify quietly resumes content development after months of stall. Meghan's team reportedly rebrands the narrative. May 2022. Harry appears in a rare solo interview, calling royal life a gilded cage. June 2022. The Platinum Jubilee. Sussexes attend, but avoid public royal engagement. It all tracks, too neatly, which raises the question, was this revenge or rollout? And if Harry was orchestrating it behind the scenes, then the monarchy wasn't being attacked from the outside. It was imploding from within. Charles